Several recent media reports state that used EVs are now on a price parity with petrol and diesel. Obviously, this is not true in the real world. Or is it? I'm Dave. Welcome to Dave Takes It On, and I'm in the market for a good, low mileage used car. Let's see what I can find. Now, to set the scene, most people cannot afford a new EV or petrol car, so we buy used. I've chosen three different budgets. First, ultra budget, it's less than £5,000. Then a mid-range, around about £10,000. Finally, the UK average, which is just over £18,000. Well, for the choice of car, I'm looking for a good, economical run-around as a second car, or possibly for a main car for someone who doesn't have kids. I chose three popular brands: Nissan, Renault and BMW. Well, for the Nissan, I chose the good old Leaf for the EV and a similar sized Juke for the petrol version. Renault chose the Zoe for the EV and the Clio for petrol. Finally, the BMW, I chose the i3 for the EV and the smallest Series 1 for petrol. All cars shown were available for sale on Auto Trader on the 4th of June 2024. And out of interest, I used Direct Line to get insurance quotes for all of these for me. Now, I'm not going to quote my actual figure, as that might be much more or less than someone else. It depends on your age, area you live in, whether the car's garaged or not, so many variables, how many miles driven. But in all cases, I used exactly the same data and just changed the car. I was actually staggered to find that, apart from the Nissan Juke, which was £100 cheaper, all of the above cars, that's petrol and EVs, came out within about £50 of each other. Well, let's see what I found. Let's start with the petrol, the Nissan Juke. And I'm going to start with my ultra budget model below £5,000. And there's actually a really good choice of cars here. And I eventually decided on, there's a couple here, around about 2011, 2012, you can get a really good Nissan Juke for about £2,500. And these come with pretty much average mileage, around about 120,000 miles, and they seem to be in quite good condition. Some of them are available through dealers, some of them are available through private, but £2,500 will buy you a Nissan Juke round about 2011, 2012. Now, still sticking within my ultra budget range, less than £5,000, I switch over to the Nissan Leaf. And I find there's an absolute mass of them available, and again, very similar price to the Nissan Juke. In the end, I decided to choose a Nissan Leaf, which is a 2012 model. This had 67,000 miles, and it was on sale at £2,695. So, first shock of the day, two fairly similar cars, petrol and EV, are available ultra budget in the £2,500 price range, and the EV has actually far lower mileage on it. That's interesting. Well, going back to the petrol version, the Nissan Juke, in moving up into the £10,000 range, I found again there's an absolute mass of vehicles available. And in the end, I chose one. It's a 2018. It's got 47,000 miles on the clock, and it was available for £10,000. Well, still sticking at the £10,000 range and switching over to the Nissan Leaf, the EV, I find there's a lovely 2019 car with 33,000 miles on it, and that also is available for £10,000. Actually, this is proving to be, maybe there is something to these media reports after all. Well, let's up the budget once again. We're up into the £18,000 to £19,000 range, the UK average, and we're back on the Nissan Juke. We find a 2022 model which got 13,000 miles, and it's priced at £19,000. Well, the same budget, but looking at the Nissan Leaf, we find a lovely 2022 model with just 8,000 miles on the clock. Actually, some of these media reports seem to be rather accurate. Certainly when it comes to Nissan, we've looked at the ultra budget, the budget and the average, and you can buy virtually identical cars, roughly the same age, roughly the same mileage, roughly the same price, EV or petrol. So the choice is now yours. But surely this can't be true for all brands. Let's switch over to Renault. Well, for the Renault, we're looking at the Zoe, and at the ultra budget end, below £5,000, I've picked a 2015 model with 38,000 miles on the clock. And that's actually really low mileage for a car of that age. So let's see what we can get for petrol. Well, I've chosen a 2014 model, and this has 75,000 miles on the clock, so that's twice as many miles. This one also is advertised at £5,000. So, exactly the same price, difference in mileage. This is getting interesting. Let's move up a budget. So in a budget up to £10,000, we're looking at a Renault Clio, and there's a lovely example here, which is a 2019 model with just 13,000 miles on the clock, and that one is advertised at £9,990. And for the same £10,000 budget for the Renault Zoe, I found a 2020 model with just 15,000 miles on the clock. That one also £9,995. This price parity is looking a bit interesting now. Well, going up to £19,000 budget, we find the first major difference. And that is, when we look at the Renault Clio, £19,000 will buy you a brand new car. You can't get a brand new Renault EV for £19,000. So here we have a big difference. But let's have a look at what you can get for an EV, Renault Zoe EV, for £19,000. So looking at the EV world, the Renault Zoe, we find there's a 2023 model. It's got just 3,000 miles on the clock, and that one's advertised at £18,665. So it's not new, but it's only a year old, and it's only got 3,000 miles on it, and virtually the same price. Interesting choice. Well, let's switch over to BMW and see what's happening here, because we're looking at the i3, which was one of the original EVs on the roads in the UK, and we're also looking at the smallest petrol car that BMW make, which is the Series 1. So starting at the ultra budget end of the market with the i3 under £5,000, I've chosen a 2015 model with just 58,000 miles on the clock, and again this is low mileage. It's gone slightly over budget. This one's £5,500. I think we'll allow the extra £500. Well, switching over to the Series 1, the petrol version, that one's a 2013 model, and that's got 78,000 miles on it, and that one is exactly £5,000. Moving up the budget, we're heading into the £10,000 range now. So for the i3, I've got a 2020 model, and it's 69,000 miles, and that's priced at £10,000. And the best equivalent I could find in the petrol version, the Series 1, was a 2016 model with 78,000 miles, just slightly more. That also was advertised at £10,000. And moving up to the top budget, which is up to £19,000, I found a 2022 BMW i3 with just 15,000 miles on the clock at £18,998. And the petrol equivalent, the Series 1, is a 2021 model with 18,000 miles on it, and that's priced at £19,000. So what's the conclusion I've reached? Well, first of all, those media reports seem to be absolutely accurate. In each of the price brackets I've looked at, under 5,000, 10,000 and 19,000, you can get a petrol or an electric car for the same price. With the Nissan range, we're looking £2,500 will get you either a Nissan Leaf or a Nissan Juke. At £10,000, you get very similar cars, but you find that the EVs tend to have a bit of a lower mileage for the same age of car. But again, £10,000, there's Nissan Jukes out there, there's Nissan Leafs out there with good mileage. And then at the top of the range, £19,000, again, Nissan Dukes, Nissan Leafs, they're just readily available, and they do seem to be virtually the same age, the same mileage. Well, if anything, the EV is slightly low mileage, but very similar price. Exactly the same story with the Renault. The Renault was different in that at the £19,000 range, you can actually buy a brand new one. You can't buy a Renault Zoe brand new for £19,000. But even at that end of the market, £19,000 gets you a one-year-old model. Same story with BMW. If you look at the i3 versus the Series 1, Series 1 is a slightly bigger car, but it is the smallest of the petrol cars they do, so this isn't cheating. But again, £5,000 will get you a good example of either of them. £10,000, there's a huge choice available. And in the £19,000 range, you get some really recent cars, 2022, 2023, and low mileage as well, 10 or 15,000 miles. So the conclusion is, there is price parity now, certainly in the used market. We desperately need price parity in the new market. That is still lacking. But in the used market, if you're in the market for a good used car, you can now make a genuine choice. Do you want an EV or do you want to stick with petrol? And that hasn't happened before. Now, we have chosen just 3 brands. There's a lot more brands out there, and these may not be the brands that you choose. But all it's showing is that in the used market, there are some really good deals to be had, both petrol and EV, and you no longer need to choose the petrol one to get the cheapest model. Well, thanks very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this, click the like button and also consider subscribing. It doesn't cost anything, but if you click the bell icon, it means we can notify you next time we launch a video. I'm Dave.